Shalom Aleichem. We are learning the Sicha of Avos Beis, which is based on three different farbrengens of the Rebbe, all in the year of Tafshin Chavches 1968. So let's start. Each of the farbrengens, when you go to Teres Menachem, adds a certain point that maybe didn't make it into the final Sicha. So let's start. The first farbrengen was on Bahaloischa. And Rebbe says regarding Perek Avos, it says in the Siddur that it's customary to say Perek Avos on every Shabbos between Pesach and Shavuos, and some people have a custom to do it the whole summer. And like we find Mamari Chassidus that were said in the summer months that often began with a Mishnah and Perek Avos. So today we learning Perek Sheni, there's a mimer of Reb Shimon, similar to what Rashi, the Rashi that the Rebbe had earlier, which was the Rebbe explored in the Rashi Sicha, which was Reb Shimon. And then the Rebbe continues, the beer in the Mishnah, Reb Shimon Omer, have a zerbe Kriya Shema b'tfilah, kshamat mispal, al tas tfilah shupah. Be careful about Kriya Shema. Don't make your tfilah set, al dachrim tachanunim l'fnei amakim, but rather an emotional beseeching in front of Hashem. And then the Rebbe went on to explain that because of Shimon ben Asana was Teirasai Yumnasai like Rashbi, and then the Rebbe went on to say that Bichlal Stam Reb Shimon is Rashbi, and that's an important point because later on in the third farbrengen in Balak, the Rebbe goes quite depth into that. But over here it's Reb Shimon ben Asana. That Rashbi, even for Kriya Shema, wouldn't be mafsik. How much more so not for tefillah? Therefore, we have to warn us Talmidim that it shouldn't be a chalishus from Kriya Shema Torah. That's Reb Shimon ben Asana. And another haydah to his friends that stop for Kriya Shema, don't stop for tefillah. That when they daven, whenever it is, from time to time. As the Rebbe says in the other, we see even Rashbi had times that he had to daven. Like we see that whenever when Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Lezer was Rabbi Shimon's son, came out of the cave, Rabbi Lezer was destroying and Rabbi Shimon was giving back life. And how was that? Through davening. Sometimes he did it through Torah, but most of the time he fixed it through tefillah. So Reb Shimon and Sana tells to his friends, don't make it tefillah keva, but rather rachamim v'tachanunim. So you'll ask, but where's the room for rachamim v'tachanunim? Begging and beseeching. They're not lacking anything. Like the Frierdiker Rebbe said about the Rebbe Marash, that the reason he didn't cry is because he had nothing to cry. Why did he have nothing to cry? Because he heard from the Tzemach Tzedek what his inyan and tafkid is. I want to pause on that. That's mind-blowing. Why don't you cry? Because you know that that's your purpose. You cry when you feel like something's not your purpose, or that's not what's in the plan. But the Marash, who didn't have an easy life, he knew what his tafkid was. And Mela, his datzin was datzin avinu shebashamayim. But nevertheless, for these people, even though they didn't often need to daven, whenever they had to daven, they davened in an eifin of tachnunim. Then the Rebbe continues in the Sicha, like the Rambam says, don't consider yourself a Rasha, and that's how and then the Rebbe goes into and says, because we all know this from Tanya. The Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya in the beginning, it's a stira, it negates the statement in Gemara Nida that the whole world tells you you're a tzaddik and you should consider yourself Kirasha. And the explanation is that, like we know in Tanya, that don't consider yourself a Rasha, but you consider yourself Kirasha, which is a Beini. The other Pshatim, what do they say? They say, don't be a Rasha even when you're in front of your friend, in your own room. That's what they translate, Al-Ti Rasha B'fnei Atzmecha, when you're in your own room, don't be a Rasha. When you're in the darkest, when you're in the locked up room and nobody sees you, don't be a Rasha. Or don't be a Rasha in the fact that you're separating from the community. So that's how they alleviate the statement that says Hayeh Beinecha Kirasha, and then it says Al-Ti Rasha. They say Al-Ti Rasha is a different statement. But the Alter Rebbe is the one that says that the pshat is literally. And then also the Alter Rebbe therefore adds the other point and says, even logically, if I consider myself a dasha yedel vav yeh. In other words, even if you manage to answer the stira, there's still a question on the basic common sense of it. If you consider yourself a dasha, you'll be depressed. You'll be depressed. That's why he asks it. That's why he adds that logical point, because l'chor, what does he need that logical point? He had a Mishnah. But as we just said, based on the Mishnahs, there's different commentaries that offer different answers to resolve it. Therefore, he brings the logical thing. Then the Rebbe went on the Sicha and says, like the Rambam says, don't consider yourself a rasha, because then you're going to give up from doing tshuva. And the Rebbe said, giving up yeyush is against the Hira of Pesach Sheni. And Pesach Sheni is from Parshas Ba'aleischa. That's when the Sicha was said. That even if somebody was tamil nefesh b'derech l'chayka, and even if it was their own will, nevertheless tshuva works, as we know in Ayem Yem. And so much so, he comes in a level higher than a tzaddik. So that was that part of the Sicha. That you have to warn the people that why? Because the Shimon ben Hassan al Terasim Nasai is protecting the Yidden from all the challenges in life, but therefore he has to make sure that they do tshuva. He has to make sure that they do tshuva. Okay, so that's the Sicha that we learned over here. Now we're going to move on to another Sicha, which is Shabbos Parshas B'Shalach. Over there, the Rebbe continues talking about Perek Avos that we learned Ba'aleischa, that Shimon Eber Zar, and then we go on to talk about the Shaychus, the connection between Shimon and Nisan al Terasi Nasai, which is similar to Rashbi. So the Shimon Nisan, his way was Terasi Nasai, because the main thing of Terasi that when Terasi Nasai is not so much in quantity and time, which and a limud nigla, and that's the main thing Rashbi did in the mother, but in the echos, in the quality of time, and specifically limud in Pnimiyas HaTorah. Like the Zohar says, Terasi Nasim is people that Shechina never leaves from them all their time, and they're adira to the Shechina. We see the Rebbe references and says that we see. How do I know? They said that they learned nigla in the cave. It says in Tanya Geras HaKodesh that the main thing that they did in the Ma'ara was Torah Mishnayos, because Sefer HaZohar V'Tikunim he could have finished in 2 or 3 months. Interesting, because definitely he didn't repeat anything twice, because in Chassidus and things you don't have to repeat it, just the way it is. Versus nigla that you explore it multiple times, and the fact that we spoke about that it's also in the echos and the quality of Torah. That's what Rabbi Kiva says to Rashbi when Rashbi was feeling bad about something. Dayecha, it's enough shaniva by that me and your Creator know your strength. In other words, you don't have to share it with anybody else. It's enough that we know it. Now, if that was regarding nigla, why shouldn't he share it? You have an obligation to share it. Obviously, he was talking about Pnimiyus HaTorah, and Rabbi Kiva was saying it's enough that the two of us know, and in other words, and Hashem, so you don't have to forward it on. Yeah. And the fact that the Zohar says that people that Terasi Nasai are a dira, home for the Shekhinah, the Rebbe goes on and says over there, that over there in the Zohar it says that regarding these people, it says V'sham b'nei Yisrael Shabbos l'doreisam, for all the generations. And the word l'doreisam is missing the letter vav. So it could read l'dirasam, which l'dirasam means their house. And it's regarding these people that they're making a dira. However, people that only learn Torah are called only learn nigla are called young chicks or eggs that don't have wings, they can't fly, or even like eggs, definitely it's not even a full life form yet. And regarding them, it says Sicha ha'em alabanim, that you have to just give me a second. That regarding people who learn Chassidus, it says Leisikach Hem Alabanim. But regarding people who learn only nigla without chassidus, it says shaleach to shaleach, as if you could send the mother and the chicks won't fly. In other words, with chassidus, you keep the mother there, and the mother refers to the Shekhinah. Okay, and then we went to continued in the Sicha, the idea that we find in the Gemara that Rabbi Elazar ben Arach said to Rabbi Yechon ben Zakkai, "Let me tell you one thing that I learned." And Rabbi Elazar ben Arach started talking, and he spoke about Ma'aseh Merkava, and the fire came out of Shemayim, etc. And the second Rabbi Yosef HaKohen, Rabbi Shimon ben Asanel heard, they also opened Ma'aseh Merkava, and the whole world started shaking, and there was a rainbow in the sky. And you see a special ilui, a special thing, specifically about Shimon ben Asanel, even though he wasn't a kohen, because only Rabbi Yosef was called a kohen, and a kohen comes by Yerusha, versus Rabbi Shimon ben Asanel didn't have the Yerusha. Just by opening Ma'aseh Merkava was his own koyach, unlike Rabbi Elazar ben Arach that said, "Let me tell you something that you taught me." It wasn't his own. So you see, Rabbi Shimon ben Asanel had something above the other three. One was a kohen, one was quoting the other. And you see that Shimon ben Asanel had the idea of a terasi nasi in a way of dira lishchina, and therefore the Rebbe says he said have a zor b'kliyash maratfila, which is shaykh to Indian terasi nasi, and that was dafka sabah of Shimon ben Asanel, not of Yesi HaKohen. And the reason why the Rabbi didn't say the statement that the Rebbe says interesting is because of Shimon ben Asanel lived 3 generations before him. Okay, then finally the final Sicha Shabbos Parshas B'Shalach. Shabbos Parshas Balak. The Rebbe talks about again the same Sicha, talking about Shimon ben Asanel, who's Teirasi Nasai. The Rebbe says, but I have to ask a question: why did we say earlier that Stam Rab Shimon and Rashbi, if in this Mishnah it says Rab Shimon and it's talking about Rab Shimon ben Asanel? Says, and the Rebbe continues, says, by the way, regarding what I said in the farbrengens, they asked a few questions, but nobody asked this question. Specifically, why did I say that Shimon is that Stam Rab Shimon is Rashbi? If this Mishnah it says Rab Shimon is Asanel. There's only one person who asked this question. And the Rebbe says, because he was trying to comfort me, he said other people commented on it as well. And he only asked after, and this one person who did ask only asked much later. And the Rebbe was kind of being, I don't know, cynical, but the Rebbe was like kind of telling the people, over here you see how people are tucking in what we're saying. Even for the few people who aren't sleeping and listening, they're not really involved. Anyways, I answer this question, that there's a din in Hilchos Talmud Torah in Shulchan Aruch Yeridea, that a rabbi should confuse his talmidim with questions in order to make them sharper. Not only is a rabbi allowed to do it, but he should do it. Like we see in the Maseches Chulin, there was a time that Rabbi did it to Abaya. But l'chor, you have to ask a question, like we like asking over here. We like digging into everything. He says, Mela, if you're trying to fool the student and you see that he's actually listening, there's a point of trying again. But if you see that the student's not asking anything, then what's the point of trying to trick him again? And Rebbe says there's over the past few years that there were many things over the farbrengens that weren't fully resolved, and there were things that were said lechatchila just to get people to question, and nobody asked anything. And it's not that people don't know how to write and ask; they know how to write and ask. And if they don't get an answer right away for 18 minutes, they start pulling connections how to get it. But when you get Torah, they don't ask. And Rebbe smiled and said, Baruch Hashem, that people are already at the level of Eitz HaChaim, not Eitz HaDas. Eitz HaChaim, there's no questions, there's no machlokes, everything's perfect. Alles is good and fine. You're going to ask, who cares? We're talking about Limud Torah, which is not Beinad Machavet, it's Beinad Mamakim. Let everybody do their own thing. But the point is that the din is that the rabbi is supposed to trick the Talmudim to make them sharper. And that's only when the Talmud's asking, but we hear they're not asking. And Rebbe said that before that din that says you can make them sharp, there's another interesting din in Shulchan Aruch. A Talmud should not be embarrassed from his friend who learned it, who understood it the first time, the second time, and he didn't understand it after many times. That's why it says the person who's shy doesn't learn. But he says that when are we talking about that a person shouldn't be embarrassed only if he couldn't understand because his mind is not grasping it? But if he's just being lazy, he's supposed to get angry at them and embarrass them. The Rebbe says this is the situation over here. That the reason people are not asking is not because people don't have talents, as we see that they have talents for many other things, but it's because of negligence and laziness. And therefore, there's an obligation to get angry on them and embarrass them. Chaya. Then it says someone who's sleeping who was sleeping in that building and is sleeping now, so has no idea what I'm talking about. And then whoever is awake and looking on all sides is not being embarrassed because he thinks it's not talking about him. So there's no point of me talking about this anything. But more importantly, why do I need all this? Why do I have to get angry every Shabbos and Yom Tov that they don't hear what I'm saying? As we know that Chas is so terrible, so much so, Kol HaKoyes, whoever gets angry, Neshama leaves him. And the Rebbe stopped for a second and said, let's talk about happy things and not about me. And then the Rebbe went on to speak about this idea that Stam Mishnah is Rabbi Shimon, and the Rebbe went on for quite a while on that topic. I'm Shalom. Just thought that was an interesting postscript.